Hello.
Good morning, Singapore.
Good morning, Malaysia. We're both from new places today.
Exactly. I'm in a corner that I won't usually hide, but this is kind of a fun experience, right? Really fun. Testing resilience. So, Sham, how are
Yeah,
you?
I'm fine. I'm feeling better. I've got my new background. You see, new background.
Nice, nice.
And you've got a new background as well,
Yeah.
for different reasons. Yeah, it's interesting. So we did something special today because we have a special guest today as well. It is, yeah. So maybe that's
Every week
why.
we have a special guest, but this
Yeah, but
one is okay. Have to say is special.
yeah, I know. I'll be giving away too much if I were to say the actual word. So never mind. I will. We
Exactly.
will. Yeah, So let's put everybody out of their misery and tell them a little bit about Lawrence, who's going to join us in a short while, right? But before he does, let me. I was going through his LinkedIn profile, and he's got an amazing wealth of experience in publishing, right? He started his career in publishing, and he stayed through in publishing for a long time, in product development, in marketing, in even managing a whole division or a whole organization. And then something happened. I'm not going to tell what that something is because we're going to ask him what that something happened, right? That something happened around when he was 35 that shifted his focus, and that made him make a few different, not different, but some decisions that's brought us into his sphere, or brought him into our sphere. And he's now founder and CEO of Finding Equilibrium, as well as a CEO for, let me get this right because if not, I'll fudge it. CEO, Australia, New Zealand, and Asia Pacific Wellbeing at Work Summits. Yeah. And he, I was introduced to Lawrence through a mutual associate, and that's Chris Cummings. And we'll talk about Chris. We might bring Chris into our program sometime in the future. But for today, we have Lawrence Mitchell, founder and CEO, Finding Equilibrium. Let's bring him on.
Yep, let's bring him in.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Lawrence. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm very well. Thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, you forget how much you've actually done in your life. It's funny hearing that sort of read out. So thank you very much for that.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. So we're going to start with the something happened. The something happened. Tell us a little bit about what that something happened.
Sure. What happened? So, I mean, like you said, I mean, I was following the path that we all follow in terms of developing a career, and I did, well in that career, I guess, by many standards, and got to a point where I was managing a large team in a business, like you mentioned, publishing. But the thing about publishing is that the industry completely transformed. Literally, as soon as I arrived, it transformed. So I had to really get used to working in a very fluid and change environment. And I was very focused on health, but from a more of a mainstream way, in the sense that I was really pushing my body to a limit. I was running, I was doing all kinds of things, and I almost thought I was like a super person. And then there's something that happened, was a bit of a wake-up call. I was running one day. I'd been to China actually for a 2-day event, and I literally went to China, came back to the UK, was out running, and I got I just felt really weird, and I passed out. And to cut a very long story short, I found myself in the A&E, and I stayed for the whole weekend because I had an irregular heart rhythm. It had a happy ending. I got out of the hospital. There was no heart problems, but that something actually made me aware of my own vulnerability, my physical vulnerability. And even though I had done a lot of things, a lot of good things to support my physical health, I hadn't been managing my stress levels, and I was coping with a lot of stress. When you're leading a big team in an environment that is constantly changing, then everybody's problem is your problem. And unless you're able to really support yourself as a leader, you can't be there. You can't hold the space for other people. And it made me realize that. And it brought me into this whole world of well-being, where I went really deep to really understand, because I had gaps in my knowledge. And that really helped me understand the interconnection between the mind and the body and our emotions, and how important that is. And I think the funny thing is that you're not taught these things when you're growing up. You feel you should be, but that really kind of helped me to develop my knowledge. So I remained in that role. But whilst I was doing that role, I trained to be a health coach, and to develop the knowledge, initially just to support myself, because I thought if I'm going to have a career in an environment which is constantly changing and be the best leader I can be, then I have to be able to support myself. And I noticed that as people got promoted in the organization I was working at, they visibly looked iller and older. And I thought, I really do not want that to happen to me. But why should I leave the job and focus? Because it always felt like this black and white. If you work in a busy environment and you move up the career ladder, then the cost should be your health. And to me, that didn't make sense, because I wanted both. I wanted this balanced world, and that's where finding equilibrium came from. It's about finding balance between the different aspects of your life. And when things are out of balance, if we're too focused, for example, on making money and the cost is our health, then the payback comes down the line. It always comes back to finding the equilibrium.
It's a cost. It's almost like a cost. Not almost. It is, isn't it? A cost benefit kind of pros, cons, cost benefit decision that you kind of have to make in your head. As I listen to your story and that something happened, right? It's like almost like something to shift, something to shift significantly, change trajectory of how I see my life. It's almost as if we need something bad to experience, to go through, and then we go, stupid me, silly me, and then I make the shift. And I see it as almost as a recurring theme when we talk to people who make certain decisions in their lives. And some people, they know that they're struggling internally. They know they've got this, but until that trigger happens, they don't make that decision. So where am I going with this? So we're having silent struggles, and women tend, if you're taking it from a gender perspective, some of our struggles tend to be more visible. So when you're pregnant, for example, and you're walking around with this big, huge bump, everybody knows it's, you know it because you see it every day, right? Everyone else knows it because they're dealing with it every day as well. For the men, some of these struggles are not so visible, either to themselves or to others. In today's world, from your work, what are some of the silent struggles you think men experience? and they're not able to perhaps talk about it or even acknowledge it to themselves.
Yes. I think you touch on a really important point. And I guess in my own journey, what I've learned is that we all have physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being. If we think ourselves in that holistic term, as a man, our culture, and we're all three of us have grown up in different cultures, but the culture that I grew up in, I grew up in the UK. I now live in Australia, and from a masculine point of view, you're encouraged to be strong. You're encouraged to almost hide your emotions because and this is certainly my experience. You're taught, whether directly or indirectly, that if you show emotions, you show weakness, and that is not associated with masculinity. What I've learned is to be a healthy man, we need to have the balance. We all have both masculine energy and feminine energy, whether we're a man or a woman. We all have those energies at our disposal, and it's finding the balance between the two. So masculine, many of our workplaces have been developed to be much more masculine, to drive, to really lead. That tends to be associated with more of that masculine type energy. But the emotions and the approaches that we're now being encouraged to do, that the research is showing really has a positive impact on leadership, are more feminine energies, which are much more around being sensitive, listening to other people, not trying to fix, being able to actually tap into our own emotions. I think girls are brought up with an encouragement to express emotions, and we also have lots of women tend to have more friends around them where they can talk about emotions, whereas men don't. Men, we go to the pub, we don't talk about emotions, we talk about sports, we talk about things, business, money. These are the things that we're comfortable talking about. These are things I'm comfortable talking about because you're not going into that messy kind of world of emotions. But when you open up that and we really understand how we feel, of course, you open, a huge well of pain that can be solved through my experience simply by talking, simply by sharing how you're actually feeling without the fear of being criticized or judged because you're weak. This is really a mindset thing that is, in my opinion, a flawed mindset, because we are told not to express our emotions, otherwise we are weak. We don't want to be weak because weak is seen as being bad. We don't want to be a weak man. That isn't good. What I've learned is that when you can express your emotions, the opposite is true. You're actually showing strength. You can connect with people. You can connect with people at an emotional level. And when you can connect with people at an emotional level, you help to move people forward. Because that's ultimately, if you bring it right back to leadership, this is what I've learned in my career, which is, pretty long now, is that to really be able to lead well, you have to connect with your people emotionally. You have to be able to help them recognize that you understand how they feel. And to do that, you have to share how you feel. And that's how you build a culture. That's how you build a team. That's how you build this sense of togetherness that we're all seeking as we move forward in this, volatile, fluid, exciting world. Pick whatever adjectives that come to mind, but we are all coping with change and uncertainty, and things are really shifting now. I feel that the research is really supporting the fact that whether we're men or whether we're a man or a woman, we need to be able to get the balance right between our feminine side and our masculine side.
And I know I said Malar, but just one follow-through question and then you go, okay? All right, okay. So I'm the type that I like examples and story, short stories. So if you could give me one example for yourself where you've shifted, where you yourself shifted, right? And you said, and what helped you shift, and maybe even an example of what you've seen happen with leaders and how they've made the shift and why they made the shift, right? And we know what happens when they make the shift from the research and stuff like that. But I think people need to also listen, know that, hey, some of these triggers, I'm experiencing it myself, or I see these things myself. Yeah.
No, I get it. So let me kind of share my own personal experience on this point. So when I was promoted and I became Chief Marketing Officer for a division of a FTSE 20 company based in London. So it was a very big role and a big responsibility. And one of the benefits when you get those kinds of jobs is that you're given leadership coaches who really are there to support you. And that was a hugely beneficial experience for me, because it helped me understand myself in a completely different way. You have lots of different tools that help you understand personality tests, but also you get a lot of 360 feedback. And when I first got the 360 feedback, I'll be honest, I was terrified. It was like, I don't want to hear this. I'm sure they're all going to say terrible things, and I don't want to tap into that. It's like ignorance is bliss, if you like. But it was, now I talk about the gift of feedback, and because that's exactly what it was. It really helped me understand my strengths as other people perceived it, and also my, I don't like the word weaknesses, but I'll call them less strengths. So it helped me understand myself better, which meant it could help me develop my skills. But from an emotional point of view, I was also in that session, I was made aware of the language I used. And I used to talk a lot about I feel. I would say I feel, because I'm a naturally more sensitive type of person, I would say. And the coach said, Lawrence, you use the words I feel. At the boardroom level, I think you should change that to I think. So this was 12 years ago, and I think the world has changed. But that kind of made me feel, okay, if I want to be successful in this world of business, then I need to stop showing my sensitive side and talk about I think. It's not that I feel, because emotions are too. So exactly what I said. So that kind of was the negative programming that came. So there's a lot of benefits in terms of self-awareness, but that. And I suppose because I did that job for almost 10 years, and I think, and it was really beneficial doing the role, because I was able to settle into the leadership role, but then start to evolve and make the role myself and change. And then I realized that because as I was studying well-being, I realized that this was flawed thinking, and therefore I needed to change. And we as a board needed to evolve. We needed to become more conscious, if you like, more compassionate, and these types of terms, because we were going through a lot of change, and there was a lot of coldness. And I think the moment that everything kind of shifted was in 2014, when the business had gone through this massive transformation, a huge transformation through the GFC. And then 2014, it had settled down, and it was back on the growth on the growth trajectory. And then we were in a board meeting, and for the first time, the HR director came in with a people strategy, and he said, "This is our people strategy," and he presented it. And it was about recruitment, it was about costs, and I listened to this, and I just thought, there's no heart in it at all. It's completely mechanical. And this is not going to really be able to be implemented really well. But that then, because by that point, I trained to be a health coach, completely outside of my work. But that was a moment when the two worlds came together. And I took that knowledge, and we evolved that people strategy into something which really connected with the people. And it helped us all as leaders face up to the fact that we are emotional beings. And if we deny our emotions, then we're not going to be able to connect with other people. And we have to recognize that connection. And I think we all know this after the last couple of years with lockdowns and so on, that connection is a fundamental human need. And if we can't connect, then we feel we feel there's a gap, and connection has to happen at an emotional level. That's how we connect with people.
Thank you. Mother, floor is yours.
You know how Lawrence gives me all the things that I'm looking for,
I know,
right? Like,
scribbling away, you know.
yeah. It's like, oh, okay. Can we just have you in this part of the world? Lawrence, as I was listening to you, I mean, of course, you know by now I love everything that you say, and I'm all hearts as yeah, all hearts as well. So what was interesting for me is that I think the assumption that in this part of the world where we assume the Western boys, the Western men, are more comfortable with their emotions, and what you're telling is that it's the same everywhere, right? So that for me, like, oh, that's nice that emotion is seen as a weakness, even though I think in the corporate languaging now, because of perhaps emotional intelligence and well-being now, we can put out these words, right? We can put out these words. And I remember attending a storytelling program more than 5 years ago, right? And I remember the speaker saying that don't use emotional words, but mild emotional words, but don't show emotions when in your storytelling, because that's what corporate storytelling is all about. And that one sentence had really got me worked up till now, right? Like going out there to prove that that's not true. I mean, that's again personal bias, right? But from what you said about the boardroom, the masculinity, and how we are both masculine and feminine, and how we need to bring that together, what really sort of popped up for me is that I think when we talk about women in leadership and the causes, Sham, correct me if I'm wrong, is that I think women are trying to be more masculine
Mm,
in the
mm,
workplace, right?
mm,
Because we are entering the men's world, and we are taught to think, not to feel, to say things differently the way men can understand it, because
mm.
we have the men as most of the men in the boardroom, right? And they're not used to it, right? And so I'm just wondering how we're going to miss the equilibrium in that sense, because you know I thought the idea is to bring both energies together, and that's the idea of diversity when we bring in women. But we bring in women and ask them to behave like men. And I would say that a lot of the training programs for women, leadership for women, tend to focus on how to feed the masculine decision makers, right?
Mm.
Right? And so we are becoming more masculine if we are not careful. We're going to lose what we were brought in for, right? And then now what you are saying is that okay, are now in a world where more feminine energy is required because of the connections, because of the coaching. So if you look at the kind of skills that's required, they're not the type of skills that worked in the past, right? So we are now asking them, can you be more I would say human, like be more you, and know that it's okay for you to be you, right? So, how do you see all of this coming together? Because I think what we're trying to do is what we seem to be going towards is another imbalance.
I think you raise a really good point, and sometimes you have to go to the extremes to find the balance around this, because it can go too far one way, but then it comes back. Because we are correcting an imbalance in terms of some of the workplaces. But I think the answer, or what comes to my mind, is it's not about whether you're a man or a woman. It is about you as an individual. It's about you being able to express the person you are, your authentic self. There's a lot of work that's gone on about how do you bring your whole self to work rather than playing a particular role. And again, that's controversial, because people say, what do you mean bring your whole self to work? We only want you to bring the bits that are acceptable rather than your whole self. But this is language that's out there, and I think the key point is whole self. We want to understand the whole person, and everyone is interested in different things. We're all unique human beings. We all have the same. We all have a body. We all have a brain. We all have a heart. We all have a spiritual life, and we all have beliefs and values that are created through the journey of life. But how that expresses itself is going to be different. And I feel that workplaces are essentially communities of people, and if we really foster the community and recognize and support people for who they are, rather than trying to change people with this kind of view that to be a leader you need to be this, directive leader, and then women who succeed need to behave more masculine than the men. This, I feel, is very outdated now. It's not just my opinion. That the data really shows that style of leadership is not going to work in the current age. We need more flexible leadership. We need leaders who are much more in tune with who they are, and I feel that is the true power. Going back to what I was saying before, when you really understand yourself, then you can then put yourself in the best environment, and you can be the best leader you can be, because you can't lead others if you can't support yourself. And really, that is the fundamental philosophy that underpins finding equilibrium. It's about understanding yourself and then creating a toolkit that can help you find the equilibrium when you need to. Because the rub with finding equilibrium is it's always a temporary state. Because like every day, things are going to come along. External things will happen. There'll be an angry customer. There'll be disappointments. There'll be losses, and that affects all of us every day. There'll also be lots of experiences of joy. But how we find that balance each and every day comes back to our own habits and routines. And if we've got habits and routines that really support ourselves, then of course we find equilibrium each day, no matter what's actually happened. But we have to recognize that things will push us out of balance, and that's life. And if we've got the toolkit, we can feel confident that we'll be able to find our way back to equilibrium as efficiently as we can. And equilibrium is true well-being, because that's where we operate from a position of strength. That's where we can respond to the crisis. We can respond to the angry customers. We can respond to the concerned staff, because we're in a position of strength. And that, for me, is fundamental. If we're not in that position of strength, we can't hold the space for other people. We can't, or to reframe that, we can, but we can't hold it as well. So that's why it's so important, critical for a well-being strategy in any organization, that the leadership teams have these tools, have the habits, have the routines that really support them, because they set the tone of the whole organization. In the work I do, if the leader is not in that kind of, is not ready, the whole organization is often not ready to really make that shift. The last thing I'll say is the most empowering part of everything is that if we know that routines and habits create our day, if we change our routines and change our habits, or elevate and upgrade them, then we change our experience that we have every day. We elevate our whole life. So it's very empowering, because it's something that we personally can control. And I feel there's so much that we feel dependent on others to be able to be well. We can bring it right back. We can own it, because we can say, I'm going to do these routines every day to support myself, so that I can show up in a much better state for my staff, my customers, all of my stakeholders.
Nice. So I just loved the way you actually summed up almost everything in a very nice way, right? So what I heard you say, in the kind of maybe confusion that we may have about being masculine and feminine, is really, if we understood ourselves, we'll understand our energies. And it is in our understanding our energies, our talent and our strength lies, and that's the gift that we bring to the table in whatever roles that we play. And we can play it naturally. We can play in our own strength. And when we do that, we bring out the best versions of ourselves, our authentic versions. And that's where, well-being is, when, we just can present ourselves as we are, and we are appreciated for the gifts that we actually bring. And what was really interesting for me is how you said about understanding ourselves, and then if immaterial of whether we're men or women, bringing these skills into the space we belong for the role, right? And then we will find the equilibrium, because now we have a real diverse group, okay, beyond being male and female, which is what I think diversity is all about. Diversity and inclusion is all about. I want to go back to an earlier question before I pass it back to Sham, right, Sham? Sham mentioned triggers. You mentioned triggers. I think male or female, we often see, hear stories of, I hit rock bottom and then I'm ready to change, which means that we usually have many mini triggers, and I can say this even for myself, right? We have a lot of warning signals that comes before we hit rock bottom, or before we actually go rock bottom. Like in your example, what was seen as rock bottom, right? And what's your experience? Because I know you work with a lot of men at the men's table, and you hear stories, and you are now helping men to say that it's okay for us to talk about what we are experiencing as people, as persons, as humans, right? Now, in your experience, what makes it difficult for a man to not listen to initial triggers and wait till we hit rock bottom? What is the identity crisis that you think men struggle with, that hit rock bottom, only then you want to, like, okay, I need to do the most difficult thing now?
Yes, no, some very good points there. I mean, one thing I'll say initially is I don't believe you have to hit rock bottom to be able to change. I mean, clearly we have seen that when there's a burning platform, that creates a lot of change that prior to that we would have thought wasn't possible. And it's very common for people to change their whole lifestyle when they're given a diagnosis that they're facing serious illness if they don't. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can learn from other people's experiences. We can tap into our own experience so that we can refine, because ultimately adjusting requires a lot less energy than making these massive massive changes. But I feel, and you mentioned the men's table, and I'll just quickly kind of summarize what that is for people who don't know. So the men's table is a group of tables where men come together to really talk about things that are troubling them. It's an amazing, I started about a year ago. There's now 63 tables in Australia, with a plan to expand across other countries. But it was set up really to allow men to come together to understand the blockers, that to really be able to articulate their inner issues. And I think part of the problem that I've learned is that men are not used to talking about their feelings. It goes right back to what we're saying, and that in itself is a major blocker, because if it stays inside you, you lose perspective. A problem shared is a problem halved, and if you don't share the problem, you have no one to talk to, for example, about the problem. Then what do? You look at that problem in a different way, and it can easily get out of control, and you feel you can't cope. That's why I was on a very challenging suicide intervention course a couple of weeks ago for 2 days. It was training that I found incredibly challenging, but the statistics show that out of every 9 suicides in Australia, 7 are men. And part of the reason is because men do not have the ability to not the ability, or they haven't been encouraged to be able to share what's happening. And the men's table has been set up to allow that to happen. There are some really interesting guidelines. They're not rules, but they're guidelines. And one of those is sharing from the heart. Another one is active listening. And another one is no fixing, because as men, we feel, or the masculine energy is we fix. If someone comes to you with a problem, we've immediately got to have a solution, or we feel inadequate. Whereas the men's table is not about that. The men's table is allowing people to share from the heart and have 9 other men listening. and not on their phones, not distracted, just actually listening. And it's so powerful to be able to listen to someone sharing feelings or issues that perhaps they've never shared before to anybody. They're actually articulating their inner fears in some ways, and it's incredible. It's a huge privilege, and it's incredibly powerful. And then being able to share as well. And after time, you build confidence, you build trust. You can't share and be vulnerable in the way we are without trust in the group. If you haven't got trust there, and it's applicable in every group or community, if there's no trust, you're not going to be able to share. And then the question is, well, how do you build trust? It's through experience, through regular experience, lots of touch points, and then after time, you'll build your trust. That's how you build a brand. That's how you build a reputation around these, around these things. So to answer your question, Mala, the blockers are really internal, because our culture hasn't encouraged us to show our feelings, as we were saying before, and B, we often don't have people that we can share our vulnerability with without fear of judgment, without fear of criticism, and therefore we don't share, and it goes internal, and we carry the weight with us, and it takes away our energy because we haven't got clarity. We don't know what to do. So it's a very complex scenario. But one of the things I learned on the suicide course I was on, we looked at lots of case studies, and many of the case studies that showed people who had got to that point of feeling that they wanted out, where they'd been where it changed their mind at the very last moment, was because they had someone to talk to, or someone connected with them about something which brought them back and gave them a perspective on their own life, on their own self, that they'd lost. They'd got out of balance. They'd started to focus all on the things that they didn't have and not on the things that they did have. And the conversations and the training that I went through was all about helping them to find balance at the moment of crisis, and recognizing that they do have people in their lives and assets in their lives, and their life hasn't been, worthless. And I feel that is a real blocker, that we look at ourselves through a negative lens as opposed to a balanced lens. We're predisposed biologically to really focus on the negatives and not look at the positives at all. And that's a big part of my work, is when I work as a coach, is I help people to reframe the way they look at their whole life, and see the fact that they do have strengths, and yes, they have challenges. We all have challenges, but if we just focus on the challenges, we lose perspective. We don't have a balanced perspective on ourselves, and we don't see how other people see us. And that's, I come back to what I was saying about the 360 feedback. And I was lucky, being a leader in a big company, that I had all these tools and I had all this feedback, and it became, after 10 years, I was used to the feedback, and I welcomed the feedback, and now I reach out actively to get feedback. And that really is a great tool, because what that does, it doesn't just give you a whole load of criticisms. What it does do, it shows you how other people think, and it shows you what your strengths are through the eyes of other people. And often we don't see that. We're blind. We don't know how we impact other people, because our perception of how we come across is very much governed by ourselves, and we don't know. And it's only when other people tell you the impact they've had, it really, it makes a huge difference, and it lifts your energy, and it lifts your, the way you come across.
Oh, damn, I got two questions now. I don't know which one to ask. When you said sometimes all you need is someone to talk to, and just to get it out of your chest sometimes is the solution, right? To just get it off, having someone to share with. It resonated with me because recently I always been seen as a strong person. I see myself as a strong person. In fact, I always say I think I'm half man, half woman. I'm mostly man because, if anybody looks at my card, I don't see any fluffy toys and And recently I was grappling with something, and I finally realized after several weeks of, not sleeping well, it's like, go speak to someone, for heaven's sakes, you just need to talk to someone. And that's what I did. I picked up the phone, talked to Muller, and it was like, not that we talked about it, but we talked about something around that space. And it was very, very helpful for me. So that resonated with me. My question, I want to cycle back to what you said earlier on about habits and routines, and all of this that we've been talking about is about habits and routines that we can either change or because it's not working for us, or create. Now, if I am thinking of our listeners and our viewers, right, and I'm a leader in an organization, and I've got habits and routines, and I'm seeking this balance. I'm looking for equilibrium, and I want that for myself. I want that for my team. But I'm working within a system, right? And I'm not even going at that organization. So that's a broader system. So if I'm looking at my ecosystem, my team, myself, my business unit, if I'm creating habits and routines, but systemically, it's not supporting those habits and routines, what can I do to influence that system? At a little bit more from my micro level, and then maybe at that organizational level. What have you?
It's a good question, because sometimes it can feel that the system is working against you, and it's never going to be enough. And I guess the first answer that comes to mind is role modeling the behaviors you want to actually see. Particularly if you're a leader, you can't change a team culture straight away, but what you can do is start to make small changes that add up to massive transformation over time. So I would say, as a team leader, if we take the perspective of taking on a new role with a new team, or evolve in that, the very first step is to understand what the habits and routines are now, like what's actually working and what's not working. What are the habits and routines of the team? Like, is it actually supporting well-being, or is it not? And that's when you have to get into a level of detail, because a habit and routine could be everyone works till 10 o'clock and that's expected, or we have 7 a.m. meetings. A lot of us work in global teams. I do, and sometimes we have a leadership meeting at 6 a.m. because we've got America involved. I'm in Sydney. So, but that's a habit and routine, and you kind of look at those communication, you look at the technology, what's working, because sometimes it's the small things that actually take away the energy. The fact that the technology, we can't print, or these are the things that really take away well-being and really frustrate people. So it's really understanding that. So doing a period of discovery, understanding how people are feeling right now, what they do personally to support themselves, and what they would like the company to do to be able to support them. So you're gathering all of that data. Well, I think that's always a starting point. Gather the data before we jump in with recommendations and fixing and solutions, because we don't necessarily know what the situation is. And then with that, the next step is to start to form a vision. Like, what kind of culture do I want my team to be? How do we want to operate? So I ran, because I'm big into community, as I've been saying, I see it as a fundamental foundation in everything. I ran a global marketing team. There were 200 people across the world, but I called them the global marketing community, because that was my vision. So you can start to use language to actually change things. So I wanted them to be a community. So everyone called them the department. That didn't feel right. So I just subtly changed it. I said, we're now the global marketing community. And then I created touch points to actually bring the community together. So I ran a big marketing conference once a year where I flew everybody in and everyone got together to meet. So different things, different Zoom meetings, catch-ups, different tools where people can have shared experiences together, because everyone is an individual. And I think a mistake is thinking that everybody likes the same things. So often we can say we're going to bring in I'll give you an example. Recently I heard it that, many I heard about a client who's working like 12-hour days. It's not sustainable. Clearly the business is under-resourced. And then the organization decided to send everybody on a laughter masterclass, which it's not going to damage. But the fact is that you've got the core problem, which is resources, which is job design, needs to be addressed, as well as some of the other things, because they won't work on it. A laughter workshop could do more damage, as it did in that case, because it felt very tokenistic, as opposed to something which is dealing with the core problems. So that's what you do to really start to change it. But I go back to what I said right at the beginning: you can't change a team unless you change yourself. So really understanding your own habits and your own routines and putting yourself in a strong position then will give you the energy to really extend that and ripple through the team, so that you have a healthy person in a healthy team and understand how to deal with, like a habit and routine would be how to deal with complaints, for example. So if you're in a retail business, you might have a lot of customer complaints. So it's really having a system in place to be able to deal with that, so that you can be on top of these things. So that's how you really start to evolve it and start to change it, and tracking and checking in regularly with people so you understand how they feel. We're living at a time now where there are some great apps and great tools around which help us as leaders understand the emotional well-being of people. That's what I did. I used an app because one of my challenges was living in London. I had a team in Singapore. I had a team in America. I didn't know how they were feeling. When you're in the same environment, you can pick up on how people are feeling because you've got them physically. But now we're all working remotely for at least some of the week, and therefore we don't know how people are really feeling. But there are tools that can give us data and insights. And I found that really helpful because it gave me insights as to the small things that were damaging well-being, and a lot of those things are the hygiene things, the fact that the printer doesn't work, or that there are people in a team environment whose behavior may not be aligned with the values of the overall organization.
I know you got 3,000 questions. We have to book Lawrence again for a private chat if he's still willing to chat with us. So yeah, yeah. Because I think what I loved about your approach, Lawrence, is that you started us off very well in helping us to think about what really is equilibrium, right? Bringing in the feminine and masculine energy that we all have, and for us to know how much of that makes us as authentically us, to be our whole self. I think we need to go into a personal development journey, and I'm not sure whether I'm summarizing it well. What I'm taking back is that if we don't do that, we're going to have triggers, right? So because when we're not connected to ourselves, I think triggers are amazing ways where the spiritual self is knocking on our door and say, hey, we're not together. So that's for me, right? And how do you deal with those triggers? Because then if you deal with the initial triggers, it will then help us to probably change our habits, our routines, like what you say, right? And the question then is, am I willing to pause and make the change that is required, right, to elevate my well-being, my life, and bring them all together? Because if I don't, then I'm going to go off balance more frequently, and some of these off balance is going to throw me rock bottom, right?
Absolutely.
It's really where your off balance is, right? So, and if you wait until your practices need to really change, and it's hard change, and you're resisting that change, right? What's going to happen is when you fall hard, and and that's going to be a lot more difficult, right? So those are some things that I took back. And I also love the way you brought in being ourselves at the workplace, bringing our best self. And you very nicely transition us into leadership and leadership behaviors, and why as leaders we need to model the way. So if we truly believe in well-being, then we need to actually show up that way, right? And what are the changes that we need to make, right? And you're talking about small changes that will make accumulative big differences, in terms of setting up the culture, because leaders set the culture, right? And the choice of language that we use. And what was my so and you talk about reframing, because the words and the language that comes out of our mouth actually represents the deep beliefs that we hold, that we may not be aware of. And I think you brought that up. But my absolute favorite was the last example, where you gave the example of, going for a laughter. We call it laughter yoga in this part of the world, right? Because I think as organizations, as leaders, we are now doing patchwork, because we know we're not getting into the root of the problem, but we're just doing patchwork, which is going to tear in another part, and sometimes in a bigger way, in ways that we may not be able to, I wouldn't say save the organization, but may not be able to bring the best out of the individual or save the individual, right? Because people are burnt out. And I just loved that particular example, because in this part of the world, sometimes, a lot of times, the well-being programs are you going for a massage, are you going for a spa, can I teach you how to laugh? So basically what we're doing is that we are putting out coping mechanisms for people, and the message I believe we're sending out is, what, just cope until
Yes.
you fall flat.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just loved, where you moved it from the individual right up to the organization to leadership, and bringing, building the community that we want to build, and hopefully the organization and nation that we want to live with. So, thank you very much. I hope I've done some justice, in summarizing what you've said. It's a topic
That
that's
was great.
yeah,
it was great. And maybe if I could just react very, very, very briefly, I guess what I'd love to leave people with is the fact that we all have choice, and one of the fundamental choices is how we react. So we don't have to, because we've talked about emotions, but one of the emotions is anger. And often if we're feeling in an out of equilibrium way, of course, we react to the tiniest triggers in a very, aggressive or angry or unpleasant way, which then has a negative ripple effect on everybody else. But we have the choice in that moment. We don't have to react in that way. We can react in a different way. And I feel if we remember that is empowering, and that helps us move forward. And it's never too late to start. We, as leaders, we can be very hard on ourselves, critical, and judge ourselves. My ask for everyone is, be kind to yourself, be compassionate, have a balanced view, and recognize that perfection is not what we're seeking. What we're seeking is equilibrium, because that will help us to be well ourselves and to spread well-being. Because when we are showing up as a leader from a position of feeling our best self, then of course that has a positive ripple effect in our team, in our family, in our whole organization. And it actually will achieve what we want as leaders, which is profitable businesses that have a positive impact on our customers and our customers' lives. So, it's been a real honor speaking to both of you today. Thank you very much for inviting me onto the show. I'm really impressed with what you do. It's wonderful. And I look forward to continuing the conversation at some point soon.
And thank you for saying this to us and joining us this morning. Thanks, Lawrence. Yes, Muller.
No, I'm just excited because he said yes in public live session. So Lawrence, you don't know what you have committed yourself to. Thank you very much. You have a brilliant day. And as we say goodbye to Lawrence, thank you, Lawrence. Sham, I
Yes.
hope you enjoyed it and you got excited as much as I did. So, Sham, I think we need to sign off. All from New Place. As you can see, I'm now seated, getting ready for my class that's going to start shortly. Yeah, and with that, thank you very much, everybody. Signing off. This is Malur from Hearts and Minds for now,
And
and yeah.
this is Sham from Being